For 40 years, my wife Martha went to the bank every single Thursday, like clockwork. I never asked why, because I trusted her with my life, and with every dime I ever made building bridges and highways across this state. I thought she was saving for our future, or maybe helping a charity. I was a fool. When she passed away last week, I found out the truth, and it froze the blood in my veins. The woman I slept beside for 4 decades had a secret life recorded in a little blue notebook, and that secret was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. Before I tell you what was in that book, and how I made my own son wish he had never been born, please subscribe to the channel. If you have ever felt in your gut that someone close to you was lying, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Thomas Bennett, and I am 70 years old. I spent my life pouring concrete and welding steel. I know how to spot a crack in a foundation before the whole house comes down. But standing there in the rain at the Oak Hill Cemetery, I missed the biggest crack of all. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the Georgia red clay into a slick mess around the gravesite. I stood there staring at the mahogany casket that held my Martha. I wanted to cry. I wanted to fall to my knees and scream at the gray sky. But I couldn't. I was numb. It was like all the circuits in my body had just shut down. I just stood there like a statue, gripping the handle of my black umbrella so tight my knuckles turned white. Right next to me stood my son Jacob. He is 42 years old and works in middle management at some logistics firm downtown. He was putting on quite a show. He was sobbing loudly, his shoulders shaking, and he kept dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief. To anyone else looking on, he looked like the picture of a grieving son. But I built things for a living. I look at details. I look at stress points. And I saw something that didn't fit. Every time Jacob brought that handkerchief up to his face, his left hand would adjust his cuff. He would pull back the sleeve of his black suit jacket just enough to expose his wrist. There was a flash of gold. It wasn't just any watch. It was a Rolex Submariner. Solid gold. I know the value of things. That watch costs $30,000 easy. I stared at it. I watched the rain beat up on the gold links. Jacob makes $60,000 a year. He has a mortgage he complains about constantly. He has 2 kids in private school that I help pay for. He drives a leased sedan. Where on earth did he get $30,000 for a watch? I never bought it for him. Martha certainly didn't have that kind of money, or so I thought. He caught me looking. For a split second, the grief vanished from his face. His eyes went hard and cold like a shark. He quickly pulled his sleeve down, covering the gold, and went right back to sobbing. A cold feeling started in my stomach, and it wasn't from the damp weather. It was my gut telling me that the foundation of my family was rotten. We went back to the house for the reception. I built this house with my own hands 30 years ago. Solid oak floors and stone fireplace. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. Now it was full of people eating potato salad and murmuring empty condolences. I sat in my armchair in the corner watching. My daughter Sarah was in the kitchen actually doing the work, making coffee and making sure everyone was fed. She looked exhausted. But Jacob was circling. He was walking around the living room looking at the paintings on the walls, looking at the furniture like an auctioneer appraising an estate sale. When the last guest finally left, Jacob didn't come over to ask me how I was doing. He didn't put a hand on my shoulder. He walked straight to me and sat on the ottoman in front of my chair. "Dad, we need to talk about logistics," he said. His voice was smooth, too smooth. I looked at him tiredly. "Can we not do this today, Jacob? We just buried your mother. We have to handle the administrative side, Dad," he pressed on. "Look, I know you are grieving and you aren't thinking clearly. I need the key to Mom's home office." Why, I asked. My voice was raspy. "I need to look for insurance policies," Jacob said, leaning in. "You know funerals are expensive, Dad. And the medical bills from her cancer treatments must be piling up. I want to help you sort through the debt so we can pay the funeral home." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my little boy. I saw a stranger, a greedy stranger. I sat up straighter. The old engineer in me took over, the part of me that dealt with corrupt inspectors and lazy subcontractors. "You don't need to worry about the funeral, Jacob," I said coldly. "I wrote the check yesterday. It is paid in full." Jacob blinked, surprised. "Oh, well, that is good. But the medical bills, Dad. The hospital stay was weeks long. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. We might need to liquidate some assets or check her accounts to cover it." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "Liquidate assets. Is that what you are calling it?" "Jacob, listen to me closely," I said. "I paid the hospital bill last week. $512,000. I paid it from my savings. I do not have debt. I have never had debt since 1985. Your mother's medical care was paid for by me, not by insurance, by me. So you do not need to look for anything." Jacob's face went pale. He didn't know I had that kind of liquidity. He thought I was just an old retired builder living on Social Security. He didn't know about the investments I made in the 90s. "But Dad," he stammered, trying to recover. "There might be other things. Mom might have had personal debts. Or maybe she left a will in there." "I just want to help you organize." "You are wearing a $30,000 watch, Jacob," I said, pointing at his wrist. He flinched and covered it with his other hand. "It is a fake, Dad. A knockoff. I got it online for $50, just to look professional for work." I stared at him. "I know gold. I know the weight of it. I know the way it catches the light." That was no fake. But I didn't press him. Not yet. "Go home, Jacob," I said. "Go home to your wife. Leave the organizing to me." He hesitated. He looked at the door to Martha's office, which was down the hall. I could see the hunger in his eyes. He didn't want to help. He wanted to find something. "Fine, Dad," he said, standing up. "I was just trying to be a good son. Call me if you need anything." He left quickly. Sarah kissed me on the forehead and left soon after, telling me to call her if I needed company. Finally, I was alone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The silence pressed against my ears. I sat there for a long time until the sun went down and the house filled with shadows. I kept thinking about Jacob's desperation to get into that office. Martha was a private woman. She handled the household bills, and she kept her own little checking account for groceries and hair appointments. Why would Jacob think there was anything of value in there, unless he knew something I didn't? I stood up. My knees popped. I walked down the hallway to the small room Martha used as an office. It was locked. It was always locked because she said she didn't want the grandkids messing up her sewing patterns. I didn't have the key. Jacob had asked for it, which meant he didn't have it either. But I didn't need a key. I built this door frame. I went to the garage and got a thin piece of high-tensile wire. It took me about 10 seconds to pop the simple lock. I stepped inside. The room smelled like her, lavender and old paper. It broke my heart all over again. Her sewing machine was covered in the corner. Her desk was neat and tidy. I started going through the drawers. Nothing unusual. Utility bills, Christmas card lists, coupons clipped from the Sunday paper. Martha was frugal. She would drive 2 miles out of her way to save 10 cents on a gallon of milk. That is why the idea of her having secret debts was laughable. I checked the filing cabinet. Nothing. Just tax returns and house deeds. I sat in her chair feeling foolish. Maybe Jacob was just being nosy. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man looking for a fight to distract me from the grief. I looked around the room one last time. My eyes landed on her old sewing basket on the shelf. It was a wicker basket she had used for 40 years. Jacob would never look there. To him, that was just old lady stuff. But I knew Martha hid her chocolate stash in there away from the grandkids. I reached up and took the basket down. I opened the lid. There were spools of thread needles, a pincushion. And underneath a layer of fabric scraps there was a hard rectangular object. I pulled it out. It was a ledger. A blue hardcover accounting book, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It looked old. The spine was cracked and faded. I opened it to the first page. The date at the top was January 14th, 1984. The handwriting was Martha's. Neat cursive loops. Thursday, First National Bank, withdrawal, $1,000. I frowned. $1,000. In 1984, that was a lot of money. That was more than I made in 2 weeks back then. I turned the page. January 21st, 1984. Thursday, First National Bank, withdrawal, $1,000. I kept turning pages. Every single week, every Thursday, for 40 years. I did the math in my head. 52 weeks a year, times 40 years. That is over $2 million. My hands started to shake. I dropped the book on the desk. Where did she get that money? Martha was a school teacher before she retired. She didn't have millions. And even if she did, why was she withdrawing it in cash every single week? I remembered something. Every Thursday, for as long as I could remember, Martha went to run errands. She said she went to the market and then to the bank to deposit her pension checks or move money to savings. I never checked. I never asked to see the receipts. I trusted her. But according to this book, she wasn't depositing. She was withdrawing. $1,000 a week for 4 decades. Where did the money go? I flipped to the very last entry. It was dated last Thursday, 3 days before she died. She was so weak then she could barely walk. I had driven her to the store and waited in the car while she went to the bank next door. She insisted on going in alone. The entry was shaky, written with a trembling hand, but it was there. Thursday, First National Bank, $1,000. And next to it, for the first time in 40 years, there was a note, a single word written in red ink. Done. I stared at that word. Done. What was done? And then I remembered the watch, the gold Rolex on Jacob's wrist, the way he covered it up, the way he wanted into this room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was terrified. The next morning I was going to the First National Bank, and I was going to find out where $2 million of my wife's life had disappeared to. And if my suspicions about that Rolex were right, there was going to be a war in this family. I closed the blue ledger and put it in my pocket. The funeral was over. The investigation had just begun. The next morning I pulled my old Ford pickup into the parking lot of the First National Bank. It was a Thursday, just like the notebook said. The sun was shining, but the air had a bite to it that went right through my canvas jacket. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching the automatic doors slide open and closed. For 40 years, Martha had walked through those doors every single week. I tried to picture her. I tried to imagine what she looked like walking in there. Was she nervous? Was she looking over her shoulder? Or did she walk in with her head held high like she did everything else? I realized with a heavy heart that I didn't know. I didn't know the woman who came to this bank. I looked down at myself. I was wearing my usual work clothes, faded Carhartt trousers stained with a little bit of hydraulic fluid from the tractor, and comfortable work boots that had seen better days. I have suits. I have plenty of money to buy expensive clothes. But I am a builder. I am comfortable in the clothes that built my life. I didn't think twice about it until I stepped into the lobby. The bank had changed since I built this branch back in '98. They had remodeled. It was all glass and polished steel now. Cold. Impersonal. I walked up to the teller line. There was a young woman behind the counter. Her name tag said Jessica. She looked to be about 20 years old, with perfectly manicured nails and a bored expression. When I stepped up to the window, she looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on the fraying collar of my jacket and the dirt under my fingernails. I saw the judgment instantly. She saw an old man who probably came in to cash a small Social Security check or complain about a $5 fee. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. Her tone was polite but dismissive, the kind of voice you use for a child or someone you want to get rid of. "I need to see the records for my wife's account," I said. My voice was rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. Her name was Martha Bennett. She passed away last week. The girl didn't even type anything into her computer. She just gave me a tight, practiced smile. "I am sorry for your loss, sir, but I cannot give out account information to anyone other than the account holder. It is policy. Privacy laws." I took a deep breath. "I know the policy, miss, but I am her husband. I am the executor of her estate. I have my identification right here." I reached for my wallet, but she stopped me with a raised hand. "Sir, unless your name is on the account, or you have a court order present with you right now, I cannot help you. You will have to make an appointment with a personal banker next week." Next week. I didn't have until next week. The blue ledger was burning a hole in my pocket. "Listen to me," I said, leaning in. "I don't need to make a withdrawal. I just need to see the history. She came here every Thursday, every single Thursday for 40 years. Someone here knows her." Jessica sighed loudly. "Sir, please lower your voice or I will have to call security. We have hundreds of customers. We don't track who comes in on Thursdays. Now, if you don't have business to conduct, I need to ask you to step aside." I felt the blood rush to my face. It wasn't embarrassment. It was rage. I looked around the lobby. I looked at the ceiling. I looked at the heavy steel vault door in the back. I pointed a calloused finger at the ceiling. "You see those trusses up there, miss? The steel beams that hold this roof over your head. I welded those. And that vault back there. I poured the reinforced concrete casing for it myself. I built this building while you were still in diapers. So do not tell me to step aside. Go get your branch manager. Go get Mrs. Gable. Now." The girl's eyes went wide. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my face must have stopped her. She pressed a button under the counter and hurried away towards the back offices. A moment later, the door to the manager's office opened. Mrs. Gable walked out. She was a woman in her 60s, elegant and sharp. We had known each other for 20 years. She looked at the teller, then she looked at me. Her face softened immediately. "Mr. Bennett," she said, walking over with her hand extended. "I heard about Martha. I am so terribly sorry." She ignored my work clothes. She shook my hand firmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," I said. "I need your help. Your teller here says I need a court order to know what my wife was doing here for 4 decades. Mrs. Gable looked at the young teller who was now shrinking back against the wall. "It is all right, Jessica. Mr. Bennett is a legacy client. I will handle this." She led me back to her office. It was quiet in there. The walls were lined with certificates and family photos. She gestured for me to sit in a leather chair. She closed the door and sat behind her desk. She looked tired. There was a hesitation in her movements that I hadn't seen before. "Thomas," she said, using my first name. "I figured you would come in eventually. I saw the obituary in the paper. Martha was a wonderful woman." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She was." "Mrs. Gable." I found a book, a ledger. Martha kept records. She came here every week, every Thursday. The book says she deposited or moved $1,000 every time. Mrs. Gable's expression became unreadable. She adjusted her glasses. I need to know how much is in the account, I said. I need to know why she was saving it. Was it for the grandkids? Was it for charity? Jacob thinks she had debts, but I know that isn't true. Mrs. Gable sighed. She turned to her computer and typed for a moment. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. Thomas, she said softly, Martha didn't have a joint account with you here. It was a personal account, a separate money market account she opened in 1984. 1984, the year the ledger started. Okay, I said, leaning forward. So what is the balance? Mrs. Gable hesitated. She looked at the screen, then she looked at me with eyes full of pity. I hate pity. Mr. Bennett, the balance in the account is $14.50. I froze. I stared at her. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under my chair. $14, I repeated. That is impossible. The book. The ledger. It lists thousands of entries. $1,000 a week. For 40 years. That is millions, Mrs. Gable. Where's the money? Mrs. Gable turned the monitor so I could see it. I squinted at the lines of numbers. She cleared her throat. Thomas, you are misunderstanding. Martha wasn't depositing money. I looked at her confused. What do you mean? She was withdrawing money, Mrs. Gable said gently. Every Thursday she had an automatic transfer come in from her teacher's pension and a small annuity she inherited from her parents years ago. And every Thursday she came to the teller window and withdrew $1,000 in cash. The room started to spin, withdrawing. But I stammered. But where did she take it? If she wasn't putting it here, where was she taking it? We assumed she was taking it to you, Mrs. Gable said, or maybe using it for household expenses. She always asked for large bills, $100 bills. She would put the envelope in her purse and leave. She never missed a week. I sat back in the chair feeling like I had been punched in the gut. She wasn't saving. She was bleeding. For 40 years, my wife had been draining her own pension, draining her inheritance, taking cash out of this bank and making it disappear. She didn't give it to me. I paid for the house, I paid for the cars, I paid for the groceries, I paid for everything. Her money was supposed to be hers. Her fun money. Her security. Wait! I said, my mind racing. Last week. The Thursday before she died. She was so sick, Mrs. Gable. She could barely stand up. I drove her here. I watched her walk in. She came here to withdraw money. Mrs. Gable nodded slowly. She looked sad. Yes. She came in. She looked terrible, Thomas. I offered to help her, but she refused. She went to the teller. She withdrew the last $1,000 she had available for the month. She was shaking so bad she dropped the envelope twice. Why, I whispered. Why would she do that? She was dying. She knew she was dying. Why did she need $1,000 cash 3 days before she died? Mrs. Gable took off her glasses. I don't know, Thomas, but there is something else. That last day she didn't put the envelope in her purse. What did she do with it? I asked. She walked out the back door, Mrs. Gable said, toward the employee parking lot. It is more private back there. We usually don't let customers go out that way, but for Martha we made an exception because she was struggling to walk. The back door. I thanked Mrs. Gable. I stood up on legs that felt like jelly. I walked out of that office and through the lobby. The young teller watched me go, but I didn't even see her. My mind was a hurricane. Martha wasn't saving a fortune. She was paying someone $1,000 a week, $52,000 a year. Over $2 million over the course of our marriage. She had been paying someone in cash for 40 years, and she made sure to make that last payment even when she was on her deathbed. Who? Who had that kind of hold on my wife? Who could make a dying woman drag herself to a bank to hand over cash? I walked out to my truck. The rain had started again. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. I thought about the blue ledger. I thought about the word written in red ink. Done. Whatever debt she was paying, whatever blackmail she was under, it ended when she died. Or maybe she paid it off just in time. I felt a cold rage building inside me. It replaced the grief. It replaced the confusion. Someone had done this to her. Someone had bled her dry. I started the truck. I wasn't going home. I was going to find out who was waiting in that back parking lot. And God help them when I did. I drove home from the bank with the blue ledger sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle that matched the gray gloom inside the cab of my truck. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. I kept seeing that word written in red ink. Done. I kept seeing the balance. $14. And I kept seeing the flash of gold on my son's wrist. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait. I pulled into the driveway of the house that felt too big and too empty without Martha. I walked inside and went straight to the landline in the kitchen. I called Sarah first. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with the same grief I was carrying. I told her to come over for dinner. Then I called Jacob. He sounded wary. He asked if I had found the insurance papers yet. I told him to just get over here. I told him I picked up a bucket of fried chicken, and I didn't want to eat alone. It was a lie, but I knew he would come. He was sniffing around for money like a bloodhound, and he wouldn't miss a chance to get back inside the house. An hour later, we were sitting around the oak dining table. I hadn't bothered with the good china. We were eating off paper plates, just me and my 2 children. The house was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the window pane and the scraping of plastic forks. Sarah looked tired. She was picking at her coleslaw, her eyes red-rimmed. She missed her mother. I could see it in the slump of her shoulders. But Jacob was different. He was eating quickly, nervously. His eyes kept darting around the room, scanning the shelves, the cabinets, the hallway that led to the office. He was wearing a casual polo shirt today, but I noticed he still had that watch on. He kept his left hand below the table most of the time. "So, Dad," Jacob said, wiping grease from his mouth with a napkin. "Did you manage to get into the office? Did you find anything important?" I stopped chewing. I looked at him. He was 42 years old, but right now he looked like a teenager trying to hide a bad report card. I put my fork down. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out the blue ledger. I didn't say a word. I just tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud right between the mashed potatoes and the biscuits. The effect was instantaneous. Jacob froze. His fork clattered onto his plate. His face went from flushed to chalk white in the span of a heartbeat. He stared at that blue cover like it was a venomous snake coiled to strike. He knew exactly what it was. I could see the recognition in his eyes. "What is that?" Sarah asked, looking confused. She reached out to touch it, but I put my hand over hers gently. "Ask your brother," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "He seems to recognize it." Jacob swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. I don't know what you are talking about, Dad. It looks like just an old notebook." "Don't lie to me, boy," I snapped. My voice cracked like a whip in the quiet room. "I went to the bank today, Jacob. I spoke to Mrs. Gable. I know about the withdrawals. Every Thursday, $1,000. For 40 years. $2 million, Jacob. Gone." Sarah gasped. She looked at me and then at Jacob, her eyes wide with shock. $2 million. "Dad, what are you saying? Mom didn't have that kind of money." "She did," I said, never taking my eyes off my son. "She had her pension. She had an inheritance I never touched, and she drained it. Every single cent. And I think Jacob knows exactly where it went. Jacob pushed his chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. He looked trapped. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Okay, look, Dad," he stammered, holding his hands up. "I didn't want you to know. Mom made me promise. She begged me not to tell you. It was her secret." "What secret?" I demanded. "She had a problem, Dad." Jacob said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A sickness. She was addicted to gambling. Online poker. Slots. She started back in the 80s and she couldn't stop. She lost everything, Dad. I tried to help her. I tried to manage it, but she was out of control." I stared at him. The silence stretched out thin and tight. "Gambling," Sarah said. Her voice was full of disbelief. "Jacob, are you insane?" "Mom. Our mom." "Yes." Jacob insisted, gaining a little more confidence now that the lie was out. "She hid it well. She was ashamed. That is why she went to the bank every week. To pay the debts. To buy prepaid cards so it wouldn't show up on the main statements. She didn't want to disappoint you, Dad. She loved you too much." I sat there and listened to my son assassinate his mother's character. I listened to him paint a picture of my Martha as a degenerate gambler, and I felt a cold, hard knot of certainty form in my gut. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking her head. "That is impossible," Sarah said. "Jacob. Mom didn't even know how to use a smartphone. Remember last Christmas? I tried to teach her how to use FaceTime, and she thought the government was recording her through the camera. She still used a flip phone from 2005. You are telling me she was playing online poker for 40 years. Since the 80s. The internet barely existed then." Jacob flushed red. "It wasn't just online, Sarah. There were underground games. Local stuff. She had a problem, okay? You didn't know her like I did. She confided in me." I looked down at my hands. They were calloused and scarred from 50 years of hard labor. I remembered Martha sitting at this very table clipping coupons from the Sunday paper. I remembered her walking 2 miles to the grocery store in the summer heat because she said gas was too expensive to waste on a short trip. I remembered her darning my socks because she refused to buy new ones until the old ones were threadbare. Martha didn't gamble. She didn't buy lottery tickets. She didn't even play bingo at the church because she said it was a waste of perfectly good time. My son was lying to my face, and it was a lazy, stupid lie. But I didn't scream. I didn't reach across the table and shake him until his teeth rattled, even though that is exactly what I wanted to do. I needed to be smarter than that. If I cornered him now, he would lawyer up. He would hide the money. He would disappear. I needed to catch him red-handed. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face crumble into a mask of defeated old age. I rubbed my eyes. "Gambling," I whispered, shaking my head. "My Martha, I can't believe it." "It is the truth," Dad, Jacob said, quickly seizing the opening. "She was sick. But it is over now. The money is gone. There is nothing we can do. We just have to move on. We have to protect her memory." I sighed, a long, rattling breath. "I suppose you are right, son. If she spent it, she spent it. I am tired. I am so tired." "You should rest, Dad," Jacob said, standing up. He looked relieved. The tension was draining out of him. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a senile old bricklayer who would believe anything. "We should go. Let you get some sleep." Sarah looked at me worried. "Dad, are you sure? This doesn't make any sense." "It is okay, sweetie," I said, patting her hand. "Your brother is right. We can't change the past. Go home. Kiss those babies for me. I walked them to the door. Jacob practically ran to his car. He didn't look back. Sarah hugged me tight and promised to check on me tomorrow. I stood in the doorway and watched their taillights disappear down the long, dark road. I waited until the silence of the night settled back over the property. Then I straightened my back. The fatigue vanished. The grief was pushed down into a deep, dark place where I could ignore it for a while. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I didn't dial a financial advisor. I didn't call the police. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years, but knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah." "Pete," I said. "It is Tom Bennett." There was a pause. I heard the flick of a lighter and the inhale of a cigarette. "Tom. I heard about Martha. I am sorry, man. She was a saint." "She was Pete," I said. "Listen, I need a favor. A big one. And I need it tonight. I am retired, Tom, you know that. My knees are shot and I drink too much." "I know," I said. "But this is about family. And it involves that bank branch I built downtown. The First National." I heard him exhale smoke. "What do you need?" "I need the security tapes," I said. "Specifically the rear exterior camera facing the employee parking lot. Every Thursday for the last month. But mostly last week." "That is a tall order, Tom. Banks don't just hand that over." "I know," I said. "But you installed the upgraded system for them 3 years ago as a contractor, didn't you? You still have the master override codes. You bragged about it at the poker game." Pete chuckled a dry, raspy sound. "You have a good memory for an old man." "Why do you need it?" "I think someone was robbing my wife, Pete," I said, my voice turning cold. "I think someone was bleeding her dry for 40 years. And I think I know who it is." The line was quiet for a moment. "All right, Tom. I will meet you at my place in 20 minutes. Bring a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff." I hung up the phone. I went to the liquor cabinet and grabbed the bottle of single malt I had been saving for my 50th anniversary. I wouldn't be needing it for a celebration anymore. I grabbed my keys and the blue ledger. I was done being the grieving widower. Tonight, I was going to be the man who built bridges and tore down obstacles. Jacob thought he could lie to me about gambling. He thought he could tarnish his mother's name to cover his own greed. He was about to learn that you don't steal from a man who knows how to pour concrete over a problem. I walked out into the rain, ready to see exactly what happened in that parking lot. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the metal roof of my truck like 1,000 tiny hammers. I drove to the outskirts of town where the pavement turns to gravel and the streetlights are few and far between. Old Pete lived in a converted shipping container that sat on a patch of land behind a defunct salvage yard. To most people, it looked like a pile of junk, but I knew Pete. Inside that metal box was enough computing power to launch a shuttle. I grabbed the bottle of whiskey from the passenger seat and made a run for his door. Pete opened it before I even knocked. He looked exactly the same as he did 30 years ago, just a little more wrinkled and a lot grayer. He was wearing a stained undershirt and sweatpants, and a cigarette dangled from the corner of his mouth. The air inside hit me like a physical wall. It smelled of stale tobacco, ozone, and old coffee. It was the smell of secrets. He didn't say a word. He just nodded at the bottle in my hand and stepped aside. I walked in. The place was a maze of server racks, cooling fans, and wires running along the floor like black snakes. In the center of the chaos sat a desk with 3 massive monitors glowing blue in the dim light. I sat down on a folding metal chair. It creaked under my weight. Pete cracked the seal on the whiskey, took a long pull straight from the bottle, and handed it to me. I took a drink. It burned on the way down, warming the cold knot in my stomach. "All right, Tom," Pete said, sitting down at his keyboard. His fingers flew across the keys faster than I could follow. I still have the backdoor admin access from the install. They never changed the passwords. Laziness. It is the security guard's best friend and worst enemy. The screens flickered. Code scrolled past like a waterfall. Then suddenly, the feed appeared. It was grainy black and white footage. I recognized the angle immediately. It was the rear exterior camera of the First National Bank, looking down at the employee parking lot and the loading dock. "Let's go back a month," Pete said, "just to establish a pattern." He typed in a date. February, a Thursday. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. At 10:15 a.m., the back door of the bank opened. My breath caught in my throat. There she was, Martha. Even in the grainy footage, I knew her walk. She was wearing her winter coat and carrying her old leather purse. She stepped out into the cold, looking left and right nervously. She wasn't walking to a car to drive home. She was walking toward the far corner of the lot, where the shadows from the adjacent building were long and deep. A moment later, a black sedan pulled into the frame. It moved slowly like a shark in shallow water. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like ink. There were no license plates on the front, and the rear plate was obscured by what looked like mud or tape. The car stopped. Martha walked up to the passenger side. The window rolled down just a crack. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, white envelope. She pushed it through the crack. The window rolled up immediately. The car didn't wait. It didn't idle. It just accelerated and drove out of the frame. My hands were gripping my knees so hard my arthritis flared. She looked so small standing there in the exhaust of that car. "Show me the next week," I said, my voice tight. Pete fast-forwarded. 7 days later, same time, same routine. Martha comes out. The black sedan appears. The envelope is handed over. The car leaves. It was a transaction. Cold, efficient, heartless. There was no conversation, no hug, no exchanging of pleasantries. This wasn't a family member helping out. This was a shakedown. "Go to last week, Pete," I whispered. "The Thursday before she died." Pete hesitated. His hand hovered over the mouse. "Tom, are you sure you want to see this? You said she was bad off." "I need to see it, Pete. I need to see who did this to her." He clicked the mouse. The timestamp showed last Thursday. The weather was clear but windy. The back door of the bank opened slowly. It took a long time. Then Martha appeared. I let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. She looked terrible. She had a scarf wrapped around her head to hide the hair loss from the chemo. Her coat hung off her frame like it was 2 sizes too big. She stumbled as she crossed the threshold and had to lean against the brick wall for support. She stood there, chest heaving, gathering her strength. She shouldn't have been out of bed. She should have been under a warm blanket with me holding her hand. But she was here, in a cold parking lot, to pay a debt she didn't owe. The black sedan appeared. It was the same car. It pulled up aggressively, stopping inches from where she was leaning against the wall. Martha pushed herself off the bricks. Her legs were shaking. I could see it even on the screen. She reached into her purse. Her movements were slow, painful. She pulled out the envelope. She approached the car. She tapped on the glass. She was probably asking for help. Maybe she was asking for a moment of kindness. The window rolled down halfway. Martha reached out with the envelope, but her hand was trembling so violently that she dropped it. The white envelope fluttered to the wet pavement. She bent down to pick it up. It was agonizing to watch. She was so frail I thought she would break. She managed to grab it and straighten up. She offered it to the window again. And then I saw it. A hand shot out from inside the car. It didn't reach out gently to take the money. It snatched it. It grabbed the envelope and part of Martha's sleeve, pulling her forward. She lost her balance and stumbled, slamming her shoulder against the side mirror of the car. She fell to her knees on the asphalt. The hand didn't come back out to help her. The door didn't open. The driver didn't check if she was okay. The window just rolled up and the car peeled away, tires spinning, kicking up grit and dirty water all over my dying wife. Martha stayed on her knees for a long time. Then slowly, painfully, she used the wall to pull herself back up. She dusted off her coat and limped away back toward the front of the bank where I had been waiting in the car, completely oblivious. I was shaking. I was shaking with a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like I had swallowed molten lead. I wanted to kill the driver. I wanted to tear that car apart with my bare hands. "Freeze it," I barked. "Go back." When the hand came out, "Freeze it right there." Pete tapped a key. The image froze. The hand was blurred in motion. "Clean it up, Pete. Enhance it. I need to see that arm." Pete worked his magic. He ran filters, sharpened, the contrast adjusted, the lighting. The image resolved. It became clearer. It was a man's arm. He was wearing a dark sleeve, maybe a polo shirt or a sweater. But it was the wrist that drew my eye. There was a glint of metal. "Zoom in," I commanded. Pete zoomed. The pixels expanded. The blurry shape sharpened into focus. It was a watch. A large gold watch. I knew that watch. I knew every link, every curve. I had stared at it just yesterday in the rain at the cemetery. It was a gold Rolex Submariner. I stared at the screen. I tried to find any other explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe lots of people have gold Rolexes. But in this town, in that parking lot, collecting money from my wife. It wasn't a coincidence. I looked at the hand again. On the ring finger there was a signet ring, a heavy gold ring with a black onyx stone. My breath hissed out between my teeth. I gave that ring to Jacob when he graduated college. It was my father's ring. There was no doubt anymore. No room for denial. No space for a father's hope. The man in the car. The man who watched his mother fall to her knees and drove away. The man who had been bleeding her dry for years was my son, Jacob. My own flesh and blood. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I taught to fish. The boy I sat up with when he had fevers. He had watched her die by inches, and he had kept taking her money until the very last breath. Pete looked at me. He saw the recognition in my face. He saw the devastation. He reached for the whiskey bottle and poured a generous amount into a dirty coffee mug, handing it to me. "You know him, don't you, Tom?" Pete asked quietly. I took the mug. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. It had been replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a man who has work to do. "Yeah," I said. "I know him." I took a sip of the whiskey. It tasted like ash. "Can you print that?" I asked, pointing at the screen. "Can you print a high-resolution still of that wrist and that watch?" "Consider it done," Pete said. He printed the image. I took the photo and folded it carefully, placing it in my pocket next to the blue ledger. I stood up. I felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the whole world on my shoulders. But I also felt strong. "Thanks, Pete," I said. "I owe you one." "You don't owe me nothing," Tom Pete said, looking at the screen with disgust. "Just whatever you are going to do, make sure it hurts." "It will," I said. "It will hurt more than anything he has ever felt." I walked out into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was freezing. I got into my truck and started the engine. I wasn't going to confront Jacob yet. Not tonight. He would deny it. He would say he lent the car to a friend. He would say the watch was stolen. He would spin another web of lies just like he did with the gambling story. No. I needed to know why. The ledger started in 1984. Jacob was 18 then. He had just graduated high school. He was a good kid, or so I thought. He was working part-time getting ready for college. What happened in 1984? Why did the payments start then? Why did they never stop? I drove home slowly, my mind digging through the sediment of 40 years of memories. I pulled into my driveway and walked into the silent house. I went down to the basement. That is where I kept the old files. Box after box of invoices, tax returns, and contracts from my construction business. Bennett Construction. I kept everything. I pulled the chain on the overhead bulb. The basement was dusty, filled with the smell of dry earth and old paper. I found the box marked 1984 to 1985. I pulled it down and ripped off the tape. I started going through the files. April, May, June, and then I stopped. My hand hovered over a file marked Job Site Incident, June 14, 1984. I remembered that day. It was the darkest day of my professional life. We were building the overpass on I-20. There was an accident, a scaffolding collapse. A young worker was paralyzed. It almost bankrupted me. The insurance investigation dragged on for months. They said a safety pin had been removed from the main support. It looked like negligence or sabotage. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of the house. The rain had stopped, but the damp cold seemed to have settled into my bones. My mind was stuck on a loop of numbers and dates. 1984. That was the year everything changed. That was the year the ledger began. Jacob would have been 22 years old then. He was wild back then, a young man with too much energy and not enough sense, always looking for a shortcut to the good life. I remembered him dropping out of college after one semester, claiming the professors didn't understand his vision. I remembered him coming to work for me at the construction site, sulking and dragging his feet because he thought manual labor was beneath him. Why? Why did the money start flowing out of our lives in 1984? And why did it never stop? I got out of the truck and unlocked the front door. The house felt heavy, like the air pressure dropped before a tornado. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went straight to the basement door. I pulled the chain for the overhead light. A single naked bulb flickered to life, casting long spiderweb shadows across the concrete floor. The basement was my archive. It was where I kept the history of Bennett Construction, the company I built from nothing, with sweat and grit. There were rows of metal shelving units packed with cardboard banker's boxes. Each one was labeled with a year in black marker. I walked down the aisle, my boots crunching on the dusty floor. I traced the years with my finger. 2000. 1995. 1990. I stopped at the shelf in the far corner. 1984. The box was crushed slightly at the bottom, sitting under the weight of the years that followed. I pulled it down and set it on my old workbench. The cardboard was soft with age. I used my pocket knife to slit the old packing tape. The smell of old paper and mildew drifted up. Inside were invoices, timesheets, and safety reports. I started flipping through them. April, May, June. My hand froze. I found the file I was looking for. The tab was red. Incident Report, June 14, 1984. I didn't need to read it to remember. I lived that day in my nightmares for years. We were working on the suspension support for the I-20 overpass. It was a massive job, the biggest contract I had ever landed. It was supposed to put us on the map. Instead, it almost buried us. I remembered the sound first. The screech of metal shearing. Then the shout. Then the sickening crash of the scaffolding coming down. A young man named Miller was up there. He fell 30 feet. He lived, but he never walked again. The investigation was brutal. OSHA crawled all over us. They found a safety pin had been removed from the primary locking mechanism. They called it negligence. My insurance premiums skyrocketed. I lost 3 contracts. We barely survived. I spent the next 5 years working 18-hour days just to keep the lights on. I always wondered how that pin came out. Those pins are steel. They don't just fall out. I closed the file. That was the official story. But if the ledger started in 1984, there had to be more. I looked around the basement. In the corner under a tarp was an old cedar chest Martha had brought from her mother's house. She kept things in there she said were too precious to lose but too painful to look at. Old baby clothes, pictures of relatives who passed young. I walked over and pulled off the dusty tarp. The cedar smell was faint now, overpowered by the musty basement air. I opened the lid. Inside were quilts and photo albums. I dug to the bottom. My hand brushed against leather. It was her old family Bible, the big one with the cracked spine and the gold lettering worn off the cover. Martha read her Bible every night, but she used a small paperback one upstairs. This one she kept hidden. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I sat on a wooden stool and placed the Bible on my knees. I opened it. The pages were thin like onion skin. I flipped through them. Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, and then I found it. Pressed between the pages of the book of Job was an envelope. It wasn't a business envelope. It was plain white, cheap stationery. It was yellowed with age and sealed shut. On the front in handwriting I didn't recognize was a single name, Martha. I used my thumb to break the seal. The paper tore with a dry rasp. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. I unfolded it. The ink was faded, turning a rusty brown, but the message was legible. It wasn't written in cursive. It was printed in jagged, angry block letters. Mrs. Bennett, I saw what happened at the site. I was there late. I saw your son Jacob. He was drunk. He was messing around in the cab of the bulldozer. He didn't know what he was doing. He hit the scaffolding support. He knocked the pin out. He laughed and ran away. I saw him do it. I saw him cripple that man. If you don't want your boy to rot in prison for attempted murder, and if you don't want your husband to lose his company and go bankrupt, you will pay $1,000 a week. Cash. Every Thursday. Forever. If you miss a payment, I go to the police. I go to the newspapers. I destroy the Bennett name. Do not tell Thomas. If he knows, I will know. There was no signature. I stared at the letter. The words swam before my eyes. Jacob. My son caused the accident. My son crippled a man. I closed my eyes and tried to picture 1984. Jacob was 22. He was partying a lot. He drank. He came home late. I remembered him coming home that night, the night of the accident. He was pale, shaking. He told us he had the flu. He stayed in his room for 3 days. I thought he was sick. Martha nursed him. She brought him soup. But she knew. She must have received this letter days later. She knew her son was responsible for destroying a man's life and nearly destroying her husband's livelihood. And instead of telling me, instead of making him face the consequences, she protected him. She made a deal with the devil. $1,000 a week. For 40 years, she paid the blackmail to save me from bankruptcy. She paid it to save Jacob from prison. She took the burden onto her own shoulders. She silently drained our future week by week, dollar by dollar, to keep our world from falling apart. But there was something wrong. I am an engineer. I deal in physics and mechanics. I reread the letter. He hit the scaffolding support. He knocked the pin out. I frowned. I stood up and went back to the workbench. I opened the incident file again. I pulled out the schematics of the scaffolding we used in 1984. I looked at the locking mechanism. It was a gravity lock system. The pin was located on the inner side of the vertical standard facing the concrete pillar. If a bulldozer hit the scaffolding from the outside, it would have bent the frame. It would have crushed the outer legs. It wouldn't have just knocked a single pin out from the inside. To remove that pin, you had to stand there and pull it. You had to disengage the safety latch and slide it out manually. A bulldozer didn't do that. A drunk kid in a cab didn't do that. Someone lied. The letter said I saw him hit the scaffolding, but the physics said that was impossible. Whoever wrote this letter knew Jacob was drunk. They knew he was on site. Maybe Jacob did hit something. Maybe he bumped the frame. But he didn't cause the collapse. Not the way the letter described. Someone used a coincidence to frame him. Someone knew Jacob was a screw-up and used that to extort my wife for 40 years. But who? Who else was there? Who knew the site well enough to know Jacob was there but didn't know the mechanics well enough to lie convincingly to an expert? Or maybe they knew I would never see the letter. They knew Martha didn't know anything about scaffolding. They knew she would just panic and pay. I looked at the handwriting again. Jagged. Aggressive. I needed to find the foreman. Kowalski. He was the only one who had the keys to the site. He was the one who signed the safety logs. He was the one who claimed everything was secure when he left. If Jacob was there, Kowalski let him in. Or Kowalski saw him. I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket right next to the photo of Jacob's watch. My wife spent 40 years paying for a crime my son might not have even committed. Or worse, a crime he was tricked into believing he committed. I turned off the basement light. I was going to find Kowalski. Even if I had to dig him up from the grave, I was going to find out who wrote that letter. I sat there in the dusty gloom of my basement, with the schematics spread out over my knees, and the truth hit me harder than any slab of concrete ever could. I am an engineer. I speak the language of load-bearing walls and tensile strength. I know how steel behaves under pressure. I looked at the accident report again, and then at the blackmail letter. The letter claimed Jacob hit the scaffolding with a bulldozer and knocked the safety pin out. But looking at the blueprints, I knew that was a physical impossibility. The locking mechanism on that specific model of scaffolding was internal. It was designed to withstand impact. A bulldozer hitting the outer frame would have bent the legs. It would have crumpled the aluminum, but it would not have neatly disengaged a safety latch that required a human thumb and a distinct upward motion to release. The collapse wasn't caused by an impact. It was caused by structural failure. I remembered the supplier we used back then, a company that went under a year later for selling recycled steel that hadn't been tempered correctly. The metal hadn't been knocked out of place. It had sheared. It had snapped because it was weak. Jacob didn't cause the accident. I stood up and paced the small space between the shelves. If Jacob didn't cause the accident, then the letter was a lie based on a coincidence. Someone knew Jacob was drunk on site that night and used the subsequent collapse to frame him. But who? Who would know he was there but get the engineering details wrong? And who would hate us enough to bleed us dry for 40 years? I looked at the handwriting on the letter again. Jagged block letters. I had seen that writing before. Not on a threat, but on work orders, on supply requisitions. It looked like Stan Kowalski's writing. Kowalski was my foreman in '84. He was a hard man, a drinker, a man who always felt the world owed him something. He retired 10 years ago. Last I heard, he was rotting away in a state-run nursing home 3 counties over. I didn't wait for the sun to come up. I didn't sleep. I grabbed the file, the letter, and my keys. I climbed into my truck and pointed it north toward the Pine Haven Nursing Center. It was a 4-hour drive through the back roads of Georgia. The scenery changed from the manicured suburbs to pine forests and finally to the rundown industrial towns that time had forgotten. I drove in silence, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the only sound accompanying my dark thoughts. I thought about Martha. I thought about how terrified she must have been reading that letter, believing her son was a criminal, believing she was the only thing standing between him and prison. She carried that burden alone because she didn't know about sheer strength or metallurgy. She just knew she loved her son. Pine Haven was exactly the kind of place you hope you never end up. It was a low brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence. The grass was overgrown, and the paint was peeling off the window frames. Inside it smelled of bleach, boiled cabbage, and despair. I signed in at the front desk. The nurse didn't even look up from her phone when she pointed me toward the solarium at the end of the hall. I found Kowalski sitting in a wheelchair as by a window that looked out onto a brick wall. He looked small. The big burly foreman who used to shout orders across a job site had shrunk into a withered skeleton wrapped in a stained cardigan. His mouth was open slightly, and he was staring at nothing. "Kowalski, said, standing over him. He didn't move. I wasn't sure he could even hear me. "Stan," I said louder. "It is Tom Bennett." His eyes flickered. He turned his head slowly. The recognition took a moment to swim through the fog of his age and medication. Then his eyes widened just a fraction. "Bennett," he croaked. His voice sounded like grinding gears. "You got old." "We all did, Stan." I pulled a plastic chair over and sat facing him. I didn't want to waste time. I didn't know how much lucidity he had left. "I need to ask you about 84, Stan. The I-20 job. The collapse." He blinked. "That was a long time ago. Bad business. Bad steel." "Yeah," I said. "It was bad steel. But that isn't what you told my wife." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the yellowed letter. I unfolded it and held it up in front of his face. His eyes locked onto the jagged handwriting. I saw a spark of something there. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. And behind the fear, there was a flash of the old cunning. "I didn't write that," he mumbled, looking away. "Don't lie to me, Stan," I said, my voice low and hard. "I know your handwriting. I read your reports for 20 years. You wrote this. You told Martha that Jacob caused the accident. You told her you saw him pull the pin. You squeezed her for $1,000 a week for 40 years. He started to shake his head, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "I don't know what you are talking about. I am an old man. Leave me alone. You robbed us, Stan. You robbed my family. You watched us struggle. You watched me work 18-hour days to pay off the insurance hikes while you were collecting an envelope of cash every Thursday." He stayed silent, his jaw set stubbornly. He was playing the senile card. I leaned in close. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I have the bank records, Stan. I have the videos, and I have lawyers who are ready to tear this place apart to find where you stashed the money. But I don't care about the money right now. I want the truth. Why did you do it? Why did you do that to Martha?" He laughed then. It was a wet, wheezing sound. "You think I got rich, Bennett? Look at me. Look at this place. You think I am sitting on millions. Then where is it?" I asked. "Where is the money?" He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly clear and sharp. The fog was gone. He looked me up and down, assessing me just like he used to assess a load of lumber. "I didn't get the money, Tom," he said. "I got $500, once, for writing the letter." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "I was the foreman," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I had the keys to the site. But I wasn't the one who came up with the idea. I just wrote what I was told to write. Told by who I demanded." Kowalski smirked. It was a cruel expression that twisted his thin lips. By the kid Tom. By Jacob. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt dizzy. "Jacob. He came to me the night of the accident," Kowalski said. "He was a mess. Crying. Shaking. He owed money, Tom. Serious money. Gambling debts. Racing debts. He had borrowed from some bad people in Atlanta, and they were going to break his legs. He needed a way out. He knew the accident happened. He knew you were distracted. He came to my trailer. He begged me to help him. He asked you to blackmail his own mother," I whispered. "He said it was the only way," Kowalski said. "He said you wouldn't give him the money because you were too strict. He said his mother was soft. He said she would pay anything to protect him. He told me exactly what to write. He told me to say I saw him pull the pin. He knew she wouldn't question it. He gave me $500 to write the letter and mail it. He said he would take care of the rest. I sat back, feeling the blood drain from my face. So he collected the money, I said. Every week, Kowalski said. Kowalski. He told her to drop it off at the bank because it looked like errands. He picked it up. He played the courier and the victim at the same time. He used me as the boogeyman Tom. He told her Kowalski is asking for more, or Kowalski is threatening to talk. But it was him. It was always him. I stared at the old man. I wanted to call him a liar. I wanted to grab him by his cardigan and tell him my son wasn't a monster. But the pieces fit. They fit perfectly. The watch, the greed, the desperation to get into the office. Jacob hadn't just stolen from his mother. He had psychologically tortured her. He had made her believe her son was a criminal who caused a tragedy, and then he had forced her to pay for that silence for 40 years. He had used her love as a weapon to rob her, and he let her die believing it. Kowalski was watching me. He didn't look sorry. He looked relieved to finally say it. He is a bad seed, Tom, he said quietly. I took the 500 because I needed it back then, but I never asked for another dime. I thought he would stop after he paid off his debts, but he never stopped, did he? No, I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy like lead. No, he never stopped. I turned to leave. I couldn't look at Kowalski anymore. He was complicit, yes, but he was just a tool. The architect of my misery, the architect of my wife's 40 years of silent suffering was my own flesh and blood. You tell him hello for me, Kowalski called out as I walked to the door. Tell him his old foreman remembers. I didn't answer. I walked out of the nursing home into the bright, blinding sunlight. I felt sick. I walked to the side of the building and threw up in the grass. My wife, my sweet, gentle Martha. She spent her life protecting a son who was actively holding a knife to her throat. She lived in fear every single day. She probably looked at Jacob with a mixture of love and terror, wondering if the witness would ever come forward. And all the while, the witness was sitting across the dinner table from her, wearing the clothes she bought him, eating the food she cooked. I wiped my mouth and stood up straight. The sickness passed, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity. Jacob wanted the money. He wanted the house. He wanted everything. Well, he was going to get something. But it wasn't going to be what he expected. I got back in my truck. I took out my phone. I saw a text from Jacob. Hey, Dad, still haven't found those papers. We really need to settle this. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. Come over tonight. Bring Earl. I found the papers. We need to sign everything over. I hit send. Then I started the engine. It was time to go home. It was time to set the table for the last supper of the Bennett family. I drove away from the nursing home with the taste of bile still in my throat. The sun was setting over the Georgia pines, casting long shadows across the highway that looked like prison bars. I had the truth now. I knew Stan Kowalski was just the pen that wrote the letter, but my son Jacob was the author of the pain. He had engineered a nightmare for his own mother because he was too cowardly to face his own debts. As I drove, the rage began to cool into something harder, something more like steel. I had the ledger. I had the photo of the watch. I had the original blackmail letter. And now I had the testimony of the old foreman. I had enough to bury Jacob. I had enough to send him to prison for extortion and elder abuse. But as I pulled onto my street, I noticed a car parked across from my driveway. It wasn't Jacob's sedan. It was a nondescript gray Ford. A man was sitting in the driver's seat reading a newspaper. As soon as I pulled in, he folded the paper and stepped out. He was wearing a cheap suit that fit poorly at the shoulders. I knew what this was. I spent 40 years in construction dealing with liens and lawsuits. I knew a process server when I saw one. Mr. Thomas Bennett, he asked, walking up the driveway before I could even get to my front door. I am Tom Bennett, I said, standing my ground. He handed me a thick manila envelope. You have been served, sir. Have a good evening. He walked away without looking back. I stood there in the twilight holding the envelope. My hands were dirty from the nursing home garden where I had been sick. My boots were dusty. I felt every one of my 70 years. I tore the envelope open right there in the driveway. I didn't need to go inside to know that Jacob had made his move. He knew I was digging. He knew I had gone to the bank. He knew I wouldn't let the gambling lie stand. He was scared. And a scared animal bites. I pulled out the legal documents. The header hit me like a physical blow. Petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship. Petitioner Jacob Bennett. Respondent Thomas Bennett. I read the summary. My son was asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent. He was claiming that the death of my wife had caused a psychotic break. He claimed I was suffering from paranoid delusions and severe dementia. He claimed I was squandering the family estate on frivolous investigations and that I was a danger to myself and my financial future. He was asking for immediate control of my assets. He wanted control of my bank accounts, my investments, my property. He wanted to be my legal guardian. If he won, he would have the power to stop me. He could fire the lawyers. He could bury the evidence. He could put me in a home and medicate me until I really did lose my mind. And he would have access to the $5 million I had saved over a lifetime of hard work. I walked into my empty house. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table and read the affidavit Jacob had signed. It was a masterpiece of lies mixed with just enough truth to be damning. My father has become erratic since my mother's passing, it read. He believes there are conspiracies surrounding her death. He has been aggressive towards bank staff. He disappears for hours without telling anyone. He is spending thousands of dollars hiring private investigators to chase phantoms. He believes my mother was leading a double life. I am terrified he is going to lose everything. It was smart. Evil, but smart. He was using my investigation against me. He was painting my search for the truth as the ravings of a senile old man. The hearing was set for the next morning. An emergency ex parte hearing. That meant I had less than 12 hours to prepare. I didn't sleep that night. I showered, I shaved, and I put on my best charcoal suit. I polished my shoes until I could see my own tired reflection in the leather. I wasn't going to walk into that courtroom looking like the confused old man he wanted me to be. The county courthouse was a building I knew well. I had poured the foundation for the annex back in '92. I walked up the steps with my head high, but inside my stomach was churning. The courtroom was small. It wasn't a criminal trial. It was family court. Intimate. Quiet. Deadly. Jacob was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. He had brought a lawyer I didn't recognize, a man with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my truck. Jacob looked up when I entered. He didn't look smug. He looked concerned. He put on a face of deep, pained worry. He looked like a loving son forced to do a terrible thing for his father's own good. I sat alone at the respondent's table. I hadn't had time to call my lawyer. I was on my own. The judge entered. Judge Holloway. He was young, maybe 40. He didn't know me. He didn't know my reputation. He just saw an old man sitting alone and a concerned son with a high-priced lawyer. Jacob took the stand first. His performance was Oscar-worthy. Your Honor, he said, his voice trembling just the right amount. I love my dad. He has always been my hero. But since Mom died, he is just not there anymore. He is seeing things. He thinks Mom was a gambler. He thinks she was being blackmailed. He went to the bank and screamed at the tellers because he couldn't remember his own account details. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Yesterday he disappeared for 6 hours, Jacob continued. He drove 4 hours to a nursing home to harass a man who has been senile for years. He thinks this man has secrets about a construction accident from 40 years ago. He is living in the past, Your Honor. He is spending money we don't have on detectives. I just want to make sure he is safe. I want to protect what he built. The judge listened, nodding sympathetically. He looked at me. I could see the pity in his eyes. It was the same look Mrs. Gable had given me at the bank. The look you give a broken thing that can't be fixed. Mr. Bennett, the judge said, turning to me, you have heard your son's concerns. He alleges that you are exhibiting signs of paranoia and financial irresponsibility. Is it true that you hired a private investigator this week? I stood up. My knees popped in the quiet room. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice was steady. I hired a professional to look into discrepancies in my late wife's financial records. And is it true you drove to a nursing home yesterday? The judge asked. Yes, I said. I went to interview a former employee regarding those discrepancies. The judge frowned. He looked at Jacob's lawyer, who was shaking his head subtly. Mr. Bennett, the judge said gently, your wife passed away 10 days ago. Grief can make the mind do strange things. It can make us look for patterns where there are none. Your son is worried that you are chasing ghosts and spending your retirement savings to do it. I looked at Jacob. He was hiding a smirk behind his hand. He thought he had me. If I started screaming about the blackmail letter, about the Rolex, about the foreman's confession right now, without the physical evidence organized and authenticated, I would sound exactly like a conspiracy theorist. I would sound crazy. I took a deep breath. I needed time. I needed to get into Jacob's house. I needed to find the money he had stolen. I needed hard, irrefutable proof that would stand up in a criminal court, not just my word against his in a guardianship hearing. Your Honor, I said, I understand how this looks. I admit my behavior has been unorthodox. Losing Martha has been hard. Jacob nodded vigorously, encouraging the judge to see my admission as a sign of weakness. However, I continued, my voice hardening. I am not incompetent. I am not senile. I built half the bridges in this county. I can balance a ledger better than anyone in this room. I looked directly at the judge. I am not asking you to dismiss this petition out of hand. I know you have a duty to be cautious, but I am asking for due process. I am asking for a continuance. A continuance, the judge asked. Give me 3 days, I said. 72 hours. Let me undergo an independent psychological evaluation by a doctor of the court's choosing. Let me produce my financial records to prove that my spending is well within my means. I am worth $5 million, Your Honor. Spending a few hundred on a detective is hardly bankrupting me. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something to Jacob. Jacob looked nervous. He didn't want me to have time. He wanted the gavel to come down now. Your Honor, the lawyer stood up. We believe there is an immediate risk to the estate. Mr. Bennett is erratic. 3 days could mean thousands of dollars lost. The judge looked at me. He looked at my hands steady on the table. He looked at my eyes clear and focused. I am inclined to grant the continuance, the judge said. We should have a medical professional weigh in before we strip a man of his rights. I will set the hearing for Friday morning at 9 a.m. Jacob looked like he had swallowed a lemon. However, the judge added, raising a finger. To satisfy the petitioner's concerns about the estate, I am issuing a temporary freeze on Mr. Bennett's major assets. Until Friday, you may not withdraw more than $100 from any account, Mr. Bennett. Your credit cards will be suspended. We need to maintain the status quo. I nodded. It was a trap, but it was a trap I could work with. I didn't need money to do what came next. I needed skills. Understood, Your Honor, I said. The gavel banged. Jacob met me in the aisle as we were leaving. He leaned in close, his fake concern gone replaced by a venomous whisper. "You are just delaying the inevitable, old man," he hissed. "I am going to win. And when I do, I am going to put you in the cheapest home I can find. I will stick you in a room with no windows and let you rot just like you let Mom rot." I looked at him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "You have 3 days, Jacob," I said, my voice low. "You better enjoy them, because when Friday comes, you aren't going to be worrying about my estate. You are going to be worrying about your freedom." I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight. I had 72 hours. My accounts were frozen. I had $100 in my pocket. But I had something Jacob didn't have. I had the keys to the house I built for him 10 years ago, and I knew exactly where he hid his secrets, because I knew he was too lazy to be original. I walked to my truck. It was time to go to work. Not as a father, but as a burglar. I sat in my truck down the street from the house I built for my son 10 years ago. It was a McMansion. That is what they call them. Too much stucco, too many columns. It lacked character, but it screamed money. My money, or rather Martha's money. It was Friday night. Jacob had left an hour ago. A stretch limousine had picked him and his wife up. I watched them get in laughing and holding champagne flutes. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the court freeze was the beginning of the end for the old man. They were going to a steakhouse downtown to toast to their future fortune. I waited until the taillights of the limo disappeared around the bend. Then I waited another 20 minutes, just to be sure. The street was quiet. It was a wealthy neighborhood. The kind where people don't talk to their neighbors and the hedges are high enough to hide secrets. I reached under the seat of my truck and pulled out my tool belt. I didn't need a lockpick set. I didn't need a crowbar. I am a builder. I know how houses are put together, and I know how to take them apart. Specifically, I knew how this house was put together because I was the general contractor. I knew every nail, every stud, and every screw. I walked through the side gate. It was locked, but the latch was loose. I knew it was loose because I told Jacob to fix it 3 years ago, and he never did. Lazy. I slipped into the backyard. The pool lights were on, illuminating the turquoise water. It looked peaceful. It looked expensive. I walked up to the back door. It was a solid mahogany door with a multi-point locking system, impenetrable to a thief with a pry bar. But I wasn't a thief. I was the installer. When I hung this door, I used heavy-duty brass hinges with decorative finials. They were mounted on the outside because the door swung outward to save space in the mudroom. It was a design choice Jacob insisted on. I told him it was a security risk. He told me I was old-fashioned. I pulled a flathead screwdriver and a hammer from my belt. I positioned the screwdriver under the head of the top hinge pin. One sharp tap with the hammer. The pin popped up an inch. I pulled it out. I did the same for the middle hinge, then the bottom. I set the brass pins on the doormat. Then I carefully wedged the screwdriver into the gap on the latch side and leveraged the heavy door out of the frame. It swung free with a heavy groan. I caught it before it hit the stucco and leaned it gently against the wall. I was in. No broken glass. No alarms triggered because the sensors were on the frame, not the door itself. The house smelled of expensive cologne and cleaning products. I wiped my boots on the mat. I wasn't going to track mud into my enemy's house. Not yet. I moved quickly. I knew exactly where I was going. Jacob's home office was on the 2nd floor. It was the room with the best view. The room he claimed he needed for his investments. I climbed the stairs. The carpet was thick and plush, swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I reached the office door. It was unlocked. Arrogance. He felt so safe in his castle he didn't even lock his interior doors. I stepped inside and turned on the desk lamp. The room was disgusting in its opulence. Leather wall panels, A desk that looked like it belonged to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Shelves lined with books that had clearly never been opened. I went straight to the large oil painting of a hunting scene behind the desk. It was tacky. I swung it aside. There it was. A wall safe. Electronic keypad. Brushed steel. I stared at the number pad. 4 digits. This was the only variable. I didn't know the combination. I took a breath and tried to think like Jacob. He was narcissistic. He was lazy. He wouldn't use a random number. I tried his birthday. April 14th, 0414. The light flashed red. I tried his wife's birthday. 1122. Red light. I tried his wedding anniversary. Red light. I paused. I looked around the room. I looked at the luxury, the leather, the view, all of it funded by one person, all of it stolen from one source. Jacob was a man obsessed with his own cleverness. He was a man who took pride in his long con. I thought about the victim. I thought about the woman who bled for 40 years to buy this furniture. I typed in Martha's birthday. July 4th, row 704. The light turned green. There was a mechanical click. I felt a wave of nausea. He used his mother's birthday, the woman he was robbing. He used her birth date to lock away the money he stole from her. It was a final private joke, a twist of the knife that only he knew about. I pulled the handle and the heavy steel door swung open. The safe was packed. On the bottom shelf were stacks of cash, thick bundles of $100 bills wrapped in bank bands. I recognized the bands. First National Bank. This was the cash Martha had withdrawn in the last few months. He hadn't even laundered it yet. He just threw it in the safe like pocket change. On the middle shelf there were passports, 3 of them, and a stack of bank books. I pulled them out. Accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts in Switzerland. I opened one. The balance was staggering. There were deposits going back decades. He had invested the stolen money. He had grown it. While his mother clipped coupons, he was compounding interest on her misery. But it was the top shelf that made my heart stop. There was a stack of papers held together by a rubber band. They looked old. I pulled them out and removed the band. The paper on top was yellowed and brittle. It was a piece of lined notebook paper. On it in pencil, someone had practiced writing block letters, over and over again. I saw what Jacob did. I saw what Jacob did. I saw him. The handwriting was shaky at first, then it became jagged and aggressive. It matched the blackmail letter perfectly. Behind that practice sheet was the first draft of the letter. It had crossed out lines. He had edited it. He had worked on the wording to make it as terrifying as possible. If you don't pay, your boy goes to jail. He had written that line 3 times, underlining it heavily, and behind that were dozens of other letters, drafts of threats he had sent over the years whenever he needed a new car or a vacation. Kowalski is asking for more, Mom. The witness is getting restless. I need another 5,000 or he goes to the cops. He had kept them. He had kept the evidence of his own depravity. Why? Because they were trophies. Because they were proof of how smart he was, how easily he had manipulated the woman who birthed him. My hand shook as I held the papers. This was it. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was premeditated psychological torture spanning 4 decades. This was proof that my son was a sociopath. I took everything. I shoved the cash, the bank books, and the letters into the canvas bag I had brought with me. I cleared the safe completely. I left nothing but dust. I closed the safe door and spun the lock. I put the painting back. I looked around the room one last time. I wanted to smash everything. I wanted to take my hammer to that mahogany desk and turn it into kindling. But I didn't. That would warn him. That would give him a chance to run. I needed him to feel safe for just a little longer. I needed him to walk into the trap I was about to set. I walked back downstairs. The bag was heavy on my shoulder, but it felt like justice. I went to the back door. I lifted it up and fit the hinges back together. I tapped the pins back in with my hammer. Tap, tap, tap. The door swung shut. It latched perfectly. I walked out of the yard through the loose gate and down the street to my truck. I threw the bag on the passenger seat next to the blue Ledger. I sat there in the dark for a moment, breathing hard. I had broken the law. I had committed burglary. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt like a soldier who had just retrieved ammunition from behind enemy lines. I checked my watch. It was midnight. Jacob was probably ordering dessert right now, laughing about how he had outsmarted his senile old father. I started the truck. Let him laugh. Let him enjoy his crème brûlée. Because tomorrow he was going to receive a phone call that would be the beginning of the end. I drove home with $5 million of evidence sitting next to me. The engineer in me was satisfied. The foundation for his destruction was laid. Now it was time to pour the concrete. I sat at my kitchen table as the sun came up over the tree line on Saturday morning. The canvas bag from the night before was open in front of me. The stacks of cash, the foreign bank books, and the letters lay spread out like the pieces of a puzzle I had finally solved. I hadn't slept a wink, but I wasn't tired. I felt a strange vibrating energy, the kind you feel right before you pour a massive foundation, knowing that once the concrete starts flowing, there is no going back. I needed a witness. I couldn't do this alone because Jacob is a liar, and he would spin this somehow. I needed someone who loved Martha as much as I did, to see the rot in the woodwork before I burned the house down. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. It was 6 a.m. She answered, groggily, panic in her voice, thinking something had happened to my health. "I need you to come over, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Right now. Come alone. Do not tell your brother." "Dad, is everything okay?" "Did you fall?" she asked. "I am fine," I said. "Just come. It is about Mom, and it is about the money." She arrived 20 minutes later, hair messy, wearing sweatpants. When she walked into the kitchen and saw the money and the papers spread out on the oak table, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide. "Dad," she whispered, "what is this? Did you rob a bank?" "No," I said calmly. "Your brother did." I made her sit down. I poured her a cup of coffee. Then I showed her everything. I showed her the blue ledger first, then the photo of the watch on Jacob's wrist, then the hardest part. I made her read the letters. I watched her face as she read the draft where Jacob practiced threatening his own mother. I watched her realization turn into horror, and then into tears. "He terrorized her," Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "For 40 years, Dad. He made her think he was going to prison. He made her live in fear. He stole her peace, Sarah," I said, "and he stole our future. This money, this is Mom's pension. This is her inheritance. This is every birthday check she never sent. It is all here." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and fury. "I want to kill him," she said. "No," I said. "We aren't going to kill him. We are going to destroy him, legally, publicly, and permanently. But I need your help. I need you to be here tonight. I need you to be the backup. We made a plan." Sarah would hide in the walk-in pantry just off the kitchen. It had a slatted door, so she would be able to see and hear everything without being seen. I went to the garage and got a canister of bear spray I kept for stray dogs. I handed it to her. "If he tries to touch me," I said, "if he gets violent when the truth comes out, you come out." "I will aim for his eyes," she said, gripping the canister. And I believed her. Once Sarah was hidden, I set the stage. I wanted the atmosphere to be perfect. I closed the blinds, blocking out the daylight. I turned off all the lights in the house except for the dim chandelier directly over the dining table. I wanted the room to feel oppressive small. I wanted it to feel like a confession booth. Then I picked up the phone to make the call. This was the most important performance of my life. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump forward. I let my voice drop an octave, adding a tremor that wasn't there. I channeled every ounce of grief and exhaustion I had felt over the last 6 months and wrapped it around my words. I dialed Jacob. "Hello?" He answered on the first ring. He sounded chipper, probably already awake and planning how to spend my money. "Jacob," I said, letting a pathetic wobble enter my voice. "It is Dad." "Dad? What is it?" "It is Saturday morning. I can't do this anymore, son," I said, exhaling loudly into the receiver, like a man who has given up. "I didn't sleep last night. The court hearing, the lawyers, the fighting. It is too much. I am an old man, Jacob. I am tired." There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. I could hear him smiling. "I tried to tell you, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You aren't well. This stress is bad for your heart. You need to let go." "You are right," I said. "You were right about everything. I am confused. I am chasing ghosts. I just want it to stop. I want to rest." "That is all we want for you too, Dad," he cooed. "To rest, to be safe." "I want to sign the papers," I said. "The guardianship, the asset management, whatever you have. Bring it over. I will sign it all. Just promise me you won't put me in a home. Let me stay in the house." "Of course, Dad," he said, the excitement leaking through his calm facade. "We never wanted to put you in a home. We just wanted to help manage things. I can come over tonight. I will bring Mr. Sterling, my lawyer, just to notarize everything properly, so there are no mistakes." "Okay," I said meekly. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I might change my mind if I think about it too long." "We will be there," he promised. "Rest up, Dad. It is almost over." I hung up the phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady as a rock. "It is almost over, all right," I muttered to the empty room. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I took the canvas bag of cash and documents and hid it under the table, concealed by the long tablecloth. I placed a single heavy fountain pen in the center of the table. No papers, just the pen. I sat in my armchair at the head of the table and waited. The hours ticked by slowly. Sarah came back around 6 and slipped into the pantry without a word. We were ready. At 6:58, headlights swept across the front window. A car door slammed. Then another. I heard voices. I heard laughter. They were celebrating. They were walking up my driveway to strip an old man of his dignity and his rights, and they were laughing about it. The doorbell rang. "It is open," I called out, my voice weak and raspy. The door swung open. Jacob walked in first. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, his hair gelled back, looking like the successful businessman he pretended to be. Behind him was the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, carrying a thick briefcase and looking bored. And in Jacob's hand, unbelievably, was a bottle of champagne. "Dom Perignon." "Dad," Jacob boomed, walking into the dim dining room. "Why is it so dark in here?" "Save on electricity." He chuckled at his own joke. He walked over to the dimmer switch on the wall and tried to turn up the lights, but I had removed the fuse for that circuit earlier. The room stayed in shadow. "Leave it," I said from the head of the table. My eyes hurt. Okay, Jacob said, setting the champagne down on the sideboard with a clink. "Celebratory drink for later, then." "Mr. Sterling, take a seat." Jacob slid the thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table until they rested right in front of me. The paper made a dry hissing sound against the wood. It was the only sound in the room. The air was thick and heavy like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm breaks. I looked down at the documents. The top page was titled Voluntary Conservatorship Agreement. It was a fancy legal way of saying I was surrendering my life, my freedom, and my dignity to the man sitting across from me. "Sign it, Dad," Jacob said. His voice was smooth, but I could hear the tremor of excitement underneath. He was so close to the finish line he could taste it. "Just sign on the dotted line, and I will take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a single bill. You can just rest. We will take care of the house. We will take care of the accounts. You just need to trust me." I looked at his face. He was smiling that practiced salesman smile, showing too many teeth. He looked at me with what he thought was pity, but I knew it was contempt. He saw a broken old man. He saw a piggy bank he was about to smash open. He didn't see his father. He didn't see the man who taught him how to tie his shoes or how to throw a baseball. He just saw an obstacle that was finally being removed. I picked up the heavy fountain pen he had placed next to the papers. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I held it over the signature line. My hand hovered there, trembling slightly. Not from age or fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the rage that was boiling inside me. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes locked on the tip of the pen. He was holding his breath. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shifted in his seat, checking his watch, probably calculating his billable hours and thinking about his dinner reservations. I lowered the pen. I let the nib touch the paper. A tiny dot of ink bloomed there. Then I stopped. I looked up and met Jacob's eyes. "You know, son," I said, my voice quiet and raspy, "I spent 40 years building foundations. I know that if you build on a lie, eventually the whole house comes down." Jacob frowned. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "Just sign it." I moved my hand, but instead of signing my name, I reached underneath the edge of the table where I had taped the digital voice recorder earlier that afternoon. I ripped the tape free and placed the small black device on the table right on top of the legal papers. "What is that?" Jacob asked, his smile faltering. I pressed the play button. The room filled with the sound of static, and then a voice cut through the silence. It was a voice from the past, a voice that sounded like grinding gravel. It was Stan Kowalski. He came to my trailer the night of the accident the recording played. He was crying. He was shaking. He told me he owed money to bad people, gambling debts. He begged me to help him. He told me exactly what to write in the letter. He told me to say I saw him pull the pin. Jacob went pale. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like he had been slapped. He stared at the recorder as if it were a bomb. He said his mother was soft. Kowalski's voice continued merciless and clear. He said she would pay anything to save him from prison. He used me as the boogeyman, but he collected the money, every week, for 40 years. I let the recording play for another 10 seconds, just long enough for the truth to sink into the marrow of his bones. Then I reached out and pressed stop. The silence that followed was louder than the recording. Jacob opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the lawyer. Mr. Sterling was staring at Jacob with a look of absolute horror. He was slowly closing his briefcase, his professional demeanor shattering. He knew he was sitting next to a criminal. I stood up. I didn't need a cane. I didn't need to hold on to the table. I stood up to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I felt strong. I felt like the man who used to carry steel beams on his shoulders. I looked straight into my son's eyes. "You didn't just steal her money, Jacob," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You stole her life. You stole her peace. For 40 years, she woke up every single morning terrified that her son was going to go to prison. She went to sleep every night, praying that the blackmailer wouldn't come forward." Jacob started to shake his head. "Dad, no. That is not true. That old man is lying. He is senile." "Don't you dare!" I roared, slamming my hand onto the table. The champagne bottle rattled. "Do not lie to me again. I have the bank records. I have the photos of you in the parking lot. I have the letters you wrote in your own handwriting." I picked up the canvas bag from under the table and dumped it out. The bundles of cash, the foreign bank books, and the yellowed draft letters spilled out over his legal papers, burying his lies under the weight of the truth. "She died thinking you were a victim," I said, feeling tears sting my eyes. "She died thinking she was protecting you. She used her last breath to drag herself to that bank to save you. She thought you were a sinner who needed redemption. But she was wrong." I leaned across the table until my face was inches from his. "You aren't a sinner, Jacob. You are a devil. You are a parasite who fed on the woman who gave you life. You watched her wither away from cancer, and you didn't feel pity. You just calculated how much more you could squeeze out of her before she was gone." Jacob looked at the pile of evidence. He looked at the cash. He realized the game was over. The shock on his face turned into something ugly. It turned into pure desperation. He realized he wasn't going to get the $5 million. He realized he was going to lose everything he had stolen. His eyes darted to the stack of letters, the handwritten drafts where he practiced threatening his mother. That was the smoking gun. That was the proof of intent. He lunged. It happened fast. He scrambled across the table, scattering the money, sending the champagne bottle crashing to the floor. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for the letters. He wanted to destroy them. He wanted to eat them if he had to. "Give them to me," he screamed, his voice cracking. "They are mine." He grabbed a handful of the papers, his fingernails tearing at the old yellow sheets. He was frantic like a trapped animal, but he never got the chance to destroy them. The pantry door behind him burst open with a crash. Sarah stepped out. She had been listening to every word. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were hard. She held the canister of bear spray in both hands, aimed directly at her brother's face. "Get away from him!" she screamed. Her voice was guttural, filled with a lifetime of betrayal. Jacob froze. He looked over his shoulder. He saw his little sister, the one he had lied to, the one he had manipulated, standing there ready to defend our father. "Sarah," he gasped. You were in there." "I heard it all, Jacob," she said, stepping closer. "I heard every word. I know what you did to Mom." Jacob looked between us. He was surrounded. He was caught. He looked at the lawyer, but Mr. Sterling had already backed up to the front door, his hand on the knob ready to bolt. "You are sick," Sarah spat at him. "You are sick, and you are going to pay." Jacob slowly lowered his hands. The papers fluttered from his grip back onto the table. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. The fight went out of him. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I sat back down. I picked up the blue ledger and placed it on top of the pile of money. "It is over, son," I said. "The bank is closed, and the police are on their way." The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by Jacob's ragged breathing. He was slumped in the chair, his expensive suit rumpled, and his face buried in his hands. Sarah lowered the bear spray, but she didn't step back. She stood guard over the pile of cash and letters like a sentinel. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was frozen by the front door, his hand still on the knob, unsure whether to run or stay as a witness. I didn't look at any of them. I looked toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom. "You can come out now," I said, my voice calm and clear in the quiet room. The bedroom door opened. It wasn't a ghost that walked out. It was Sheriff Miller, followed closely by my personal attorney, Mr. Henderson. They had been in there for an hour, sitting in the dark, listening to every word recorded on the audio feed I had set up. Jacob looked up. When he saw the sheriff, his eyes bulged. He realized then that this wasn't just a family dispute. This wasn't something he could talk his way out of or settle with a hug and a promise to do better. This was the end of the line. Sheriff Miller walked into the light of the chandelier. He was a big man, a man I had known for 20 years. He looked at Jacob with pure disgust. Jacob Bennett, the sheriff, said, his hand resting on his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." Jacob scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the floor. "No. No, wait. Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. It is a family matter. My dad, he is confused. We were just arguing about money." "It didn't sound like a misunderstanding to me, son," the sheriff said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "It sounded like a confession. I heard you admit to blackmail. I heard you admit to extortion. And I heard you threaten your father." Mr. Henderson stepped forward. He was holding a file. He looked at Jacob's lawyer, who was now trying to fade into the wallpaper. "It is worse than that," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dry and professional. "We have the bank records from the Cayman Islands, Jacob. We have the pattern of deposits matching the withdrawals from your mother's accounts. That is money laundering and tax evasion. The IRS has already been notified. They are very interested in how a middle manager with a $60,000 salary has offshore accounts worth millions." Jacob looked at Mr. Sterling, his lawyer. "Do something," he pleaded. "Stop them." Mr. Sterling shook his head slowly. "I am sorry, Jacob. I can't be a party to this. You lied to me. You told me this was a simple guardianship case. I am recusing myself immediately." He opened the door and walked out, leaving Jacob alone with the consequences of his actions. Jacob looked at me. His face crumpled. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Only the jar was his mother's life savings. "Dad, please," he wept. "Dad, tell them to stop. I am your son. You can't let them take me to jail. Think about the family. Think about the grandkids." I looked at him. I thought about the family. I thought about Artatha walking in the rain to the bank. I thought about her falling to her knees in the parking lot. I thought about the 40 years of fear she lived with because of him. "You stopped being my son the day you wrote that first letter," I said. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "Stand up, Jacob. Turn around." Jacob stood up slowly, shaking like a leaf. The sheriff spun him around and pulled his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click, click. They hauled him toward the door. Sarah watched him go, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look away. She was strong like her mother. "Wait," I said. The sheriff stopped, holding Jacob by the arm. I walked over to the sideboard where I kept my checkbook. I opened it. I took a pen and wrote out a check. I moved slowly, deliberately. I tore it out of the book with a sharp rip. I walked over to Jacob. He looked at me with a glimmer of hope in his wet eyes. Maybe he thought I was writing him a check for bail. Maybe he thought I was giving him money for a lawyer. Maybe he thought I was still the fool he took me for. I tucked the check into the breast pocket of his navy suit, right next to the silk handkerchief he used to fake his tears at the funeral. "What is this?" Jacob whispered. "It is $14.50, I said. He looked confused. "What?" "That is the balance of your mother's bank account," I said. "That is exactly what she had left when she died, because you took everything else. And that is exactly what you are worth to me now." I leaned in close so he could smell the coffee on my breath, so he could see the hard lines of my face. "Take it," I said. "You can use it to buy cigarettes in prison." Jacob stared at me. Then he started to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage. A tantrum. "You old bastard," he yelled as the sheriff dragged him out the door. "It was my money. I deserved it. I waited for you to die, but you just wouldn't die." They dragged him out onto the front porch. The flashing blue lights of the cruiser lit up the yard, turning the oak trees into ghostly skeletons. Parked in the driveway behind the cruiser was the limousine Jacob had arrived in. The back door opened, and his wife Linda stepped out. She was dressed for a celebration, wearing a cocktail dress and holding a clutch purse. She looked at her husband in handcuffs. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at me standing in the doorway. Jacob Linda screamed, running toward him. "What is happening?" "He stole it all, Linda," I called out from the porch. "The house, the cars, the vacations, it was all stolen from his mother. And now the government is going to take it back." Linda stopped running. She looked at Jacob with horror. She didn't come closer. She backed away. She knew what this meant. The money train was over. The social status was gone. She looked at him not with love but with the realization that her life was ruined. Jacob was still screaming as they shoved him into the back of the police car. He was blaming me. He was blaming Sarah. He was blaming everyone but himself. The sheriff slammed the door, shutting off the noise. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away. The red taillights faded into the distance. Linda got back into the limo, and it drove off, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the air. She didn't even look at me. Silence returned to the property. The crickets started chirping again. The wind rustled the leaves. Sarah walked out and stood next to me. She slipped her hand into mine. Her palm was warm. "It is over, Dad," she whispered. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. For the first time in 6 months, the weight on my chest was gone. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "It is over." We went back inside. The money was still on the table. The letters were still there. But they didn't have power over us anymore. They were just paper. I looked at the blue ledger sitting on top of the pile. I picked it up. Tomorrow I would burn it. Tomorrow I would start the process of selling the house and moving on. But tonight I was going to sleep. I was going to sleep the sleep of the just. I looked at Sarah. "You hungry?" I asked. "There is still some fried chicken left." She smiled a watery, sad smile. "Yeah, Dad. I am hungry." We sat down at the table and ate in the dim light. The house felt different. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt empty, yes, but it was a clean emptiness, a space ready to be filled with something new. I had lost a son, but I had saved my dignity. And somewhere I hoped Martha was watching. I hoped she saw that she didn't have to protect me anymore. I hoped she saw that the debt was paid in full, not with money, but with justice. $14.50. It wasn't much, but it was the price of freedom. And I had paid it gladly. It took exactly 30 days to dismantle a life that took 40 years to build. The house sold in a week. It turns out that a solid foundation and real oak floors are still worth something in this world, even if the memories inside are tarnished. I walked through the empty rooms one last time yesterday. The echo of my boots on the hardwood didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded clean. It sounded like a blank slate. I didn't feel the ghosts of the past reaching out to grab my ankles. I just saw walls that needed painting and a roof that would keep the new young couple dry. I left the keys on the kitchen counter next to a bottle of wine for them. I hope they fill this place with better memories than I did. I hope they raise children who know the value of truth. I met Sarah in the driveway. She looked different these days, lighter. The shadow of her brother was gone from her life. Jacob was currently sitting in a county jail cell, denied bail, because the judge considered him a flight risk due to his offshore accounts. His wife had filed for divorce and taken the kids to her mother's in Florida. The empire of lies he had built had collapsed into dust, just like I said it would. I handed Sarah a thick envelope. Inside were the details of a trust fund I had set up. I took half of the recovered money and put it away for her and her children. Their college was paid for. Their first houses were paid for. Sarah cried when she saw the numbers. She tried to give it back, saying she didn't want anything to do with the tainted money. It is not tainted, I told her. It is your mother's legacy. It is the only good thing to come out of this mess. Use it to give those kids the life she wanted for them. Use it to teach them that they don't have to lie or steal to be happy. She hugged me tighter than she ever has. She asked me where I was going to sleep. She asked me if I wanted to stay in her guest room. I told her no. I told her I had other plans. I told her I had a promise to keep. I drove my truck to the Oak Hill Cemetery. It was a beautiful day. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of blue that hurts your eyes if you stare at it too long. The rain and the mud from the funeral were gone, replaced by green grass and wildflowers. It was peaceful. I walked to Martha's grave. The headstone had been installed a few days ago. Martha Bennett, beloved wife and mother. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the wind in the trees. I thought about the woman I married. I thought about the young girl with the bright eyes who promised to love me for richer or for poorer. She kept that promise. She loved me enough to sacrifice her own peace of mind. She loved me enough to let a parasite bleed her dry just so I wouldn't lose my business. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the blue ledger. The spine was broken. The pages were dog-eared. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a book should feel. It felt like holding a brick of lead. I knelt down on the grass. I took out my Zippo lighter. The metal was cool against my thumb. "You were foolish, Martha," I whispered to the cold stone. "You were so incredibly foolish. You thought you were protecting me, but you were just feeding a monster. You should have told me. We could have faced it together. I would have torn the world apart for you." I flicked the lighter. The flame danced in the breeze. "But I love you," I said, my voice catching. "I love you more than I can say. And I forgive you. I forgive you for the secrets. I forgive you for the lies. You did what you thought you had to do. You were a mother protecting her cub, even if the cub was a wolf." I touched the flame to the corner of the blue cover. The cardboard caught quickly. The fire curled the edges, turning the blue to black. I watched the flames eat the dates. 1984, 1990, 2010. I watched the numbers disappear. The thousands of withdrawals, the millions of dollars. The record of 40 years of extortion turned into gray ash and floated away on the wind. "I have cleaned up the mess, Martha," I said, as the last of the book crumbled into dust. I took out the trash. "Jacob can't hurt us anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore. You can rest now. You don't have to worry about the police. You don't have to worry about the neighbors. It is done." I stood up and brushed the ash from my knees. I felt light. I felt like gravity had lost its hold on me. "Rest in peace, my love," I said. "I will see you down the road." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. There was nothing there but a stone and a memory. The rest of my life was waiting in the parking lot. Parked next to my old pickup truck was a beast, a 40-foot diesel pusher motorhome. It was brand new, gleaming white with chrome accents. It had a king-sized bed, a full kitchen, and a panoramic windshield that wrapped around the front like a pair of sunglasses. We had talked about getting an RV for 30 years. We were going to drive to the Grand Canyon. We were going to see Yellowstone. We were going to dip our toes in the Pacific Ocean. But there was always a reason not to go. There was always a bill to pay. There was always a crisis with Jacob. Well, there were no more reasons. I transferred my duffel bag from the truck to the RV. I put my toolbox in the storage bay. I put a framed photo of Martha on the dashboard right next to the GPS. I climbed into the driver's seat. It sat high above the road. The seat was air-cushioned leather, soft and supportive. I put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that shook the frame. It sounded like freedom. I checked the mirrors. I checked the gauges. Full tank of fuel. Water tank full. Fridge stocked with real food, not beans and bread. I was 70 years old. I had no house. I had no wife. I had one child I was leaving behind, and another I hoped to never see again. I had $5 million in the bank and a whole country in front of me. I released the parking brake. The huge vehicle lurched forward, eager to move. I pulled out of the cemetery lot and turned onto the highway. The road stretched out toward the horizon, a gray ribbon cutting through the green world. I looked in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the old house with its dark corners. I didn't see the bank with its secret back door. I didn't see the son who had betrayed me. I saw the asphalt disappearing behind me. I saw the miles accumulating between me and the past. I shifted gears and pressed the accelerator. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't building something for someone else. I wasn't fixing someone else's mistakes. I wasn't worrying about payroll or insurance or blackmail. I was just driving. I looked at the photo on the dashboard. Martha was smiling. "We are going to the ocean, Martha," I said, "just like we promised." I looked at the road ahead, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. The most valuable lesson I've learned at the age of 70 is not how to make money, but the cost of covering up. My wife spent 40 years protecting our son from the consequences, but in reality she had unknowingly nurtured a monster right in our own home. Love without reason saves no one. It only prolongs the tragedy. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comforting lie. Don't let the name family force you to accept abuse. Sometimes the bravest act of love is to let your loved ones face responsibility before the law and their conscience. If the journey of this old man seeking justice has touched your emotions, please give me a like so I know I'm not alone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join me on the upcoming roads to freedom. Have you ever discovered a shocking secret about a loved one? Share your story below.